You just wait. You're gonna see major changes in my life. I meet women all the time, all over the place. All you gotta do is live in New York and you meet a girl a minute. And I've met some real special ladies recently. Like, right now I'm dating this flight attendant. Cute, original, odd. Oh, and Kathy. You guys never met Kathy, did you? Well, she's the best. I'm talking the best. Oh, and then there's Marta. God, now she is fun. I'm certainly not resisting marriage. I mean it when I say that my life is totally prepared for a gigantic change right now. I am ready to be married.
Right. Then why aren't you?
Right.
Right.
Welcome to Putting It Together, the podcast that goes through the entire body of work of Stephen Sondheim, show by show and song by song. My name is Kyle Marshall, the two-time Canadian Podcast Award nominee, and your self-described Sondheim expert. Some scary news this week. Sondheim had a bit of a fall, which prevented him from flying to London so that he could see the opening of the new Sondheim Theatre in the West End. Certainly, myself and I'm sure everybody listening wishes him a very quick recovery. Definitely at this point, anytime I see tragically Sondheim as the first two words of a news article, my heart drops a little bit. I'm like, please, no. But then you read the rest of the sentence and realize maybe I shouldn't react to things only halfway through, which is maybe why I have such a bad time on Twitter. Probably why everyone has a bad time on Twitter. In much more positive news, I mentioned this already on a previous podcast, may have even been last week, but who is taking score? My tickets have been bought for Company on Broadway. So yes, I'm going to be in New York City. I'm going to be watching the new Company up in the nosebleeds, basically. I'm up in the mezzanine, but it should be a good time. I'm really excited about it, and I'm going to just float this idea to see if anyone is interested of a meetup in New York. Maybe you live there, or you're in the surrounding area, or you're coming to watch the show yourself. I'm going to be seeing the show the night of March 28th. So if that lines up with you, whether it's that day, day before, day after, let me know. It's going to be a very quick trip for me. It's going to be a kind of a there and back again situation. I'm giving myself a little bit of a buffer as far as like travel days and maybe being able to see another show or explore something I haven't seen in New York before. Regardless of that, I would love to be able to talk about Sondheim face to face if we can organize it. So if you're interested, send an email to puttingittogetherpodcast@gmail.com or send a message to Sondheim Podcast on Instagram or Twitter. I want to get right to this week's episode, so I guess it's time for Plodding Along. This is the part of the show where I fill you in on what is going on with the plot of the show. So, the next vignette has started. Bobby is with his friends, Peter and Susan. Peter is an Ivy League graduate, and Susan is a sweet Southern belle. They both seem like the perfect couple, which is why it comes as such a surprise when they announce their divorce. Then another vignette starts, and Bobby is with his friends David and Jenny. David is described as chic, and Jenny is described as uptight. They both question Bobby about why he hasn't gotten married yet. Bobby claims he's not against it, and in fact, he's currently dating 3 women, Kathy, Marta, and April. When Bobby says he does want to get married, 3 girlfriends sing this song, You Drive a Person Crazy. Let's thank some of our sponsors, and then when we return, I'll be talking about the song You Could Drive a Person Crazy with Christine Chen. Putting It Together is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network powered by ATB. The Alberta Podcast Network promotes and supports Alberta-made podcasts and connects their audiences with Alberta-based businesses and organizations. This episode of Putting It Together is brought to you by Park Power, a provider of electricity and natural gas in Alberta that offers low rates, awesome service, and profit sharing with local charities. In Alberta, you get to choose who to buy your energy from. Park Power has low overhead, and chances are you'll save money if you switch. You can find out how much money you could save by visiting parkpower.ca and plugging your numbers into the Alberta Energy Savings Calculator. If you decide to switch, it's easy. Nothing changes about your service, only the price you pay. Learn more at parkpower.ca. This episode of Putting It Together is also sponsored by NorQuest Careermoves, which has this message.
Your next career move is right around the corner, and NorQuest College is here to help. Our new Career Moves professional development program will help you transition to new job opportunities. Funded by the Future Skills Center, we will provide one-on-one coaching, self-assessments, skill development and training, and up to $2,000 in available tuition credit. Our focus is your success. Make your next move. Apply today at norquest.ca/careermoves.
You could drive a person crazy. You could drive a person mad. First you make a person hazy.
Christine, thank you so much for coming back again.
Hi, Kyle. Thanks again for having me.
This is gonna be real fun, I think. This song has proven to be much more interesting than I thought at first listen. So we're gonna really delve into it a little bit more. But before we get there, maybe you can describe who you are and what you've been up to since the last time you were on.
All right. So I'm Christine. I'm a software engineer living and working in New York City. And the last time I was on was for Anyone Can Whistle and the Miracle Song. Mm-hmm. And since then, I mean, not much has happened with me, but just taking advantage of being able to live in New York City and go see Broadway shows, and definitely looking forward to the new Company revival since I haven't seen the London one.
Yeah, I'm getting excited about that too. I'm trying to figure out plane tickets and stuff and see when I can actually come and stuff like that. But tickets are not cheap for the flight. I'm finding out depending on when I want to go. You got to see The Groff though here very recently. You went and saw the new Little Shop of Horrors, right?
Lift up your head, wash off your mascara. Here, take my Kleenex. Wipe that lipstick away. Show me your face, clean as the morning. I know things were bad, but now they're okay. Suddenly, see more.
Right, yeah, that one's an off-Broadway production, but I do also host a podcast called Bottomless Broadway with one of my friends, where we just talk about things we've seen mostly from each Tony season, but we decided to venture off-Broadway to, check out Jonathan Groff and Christian Borle are both in that. And that was a really good show, a very traditional take of Little Shop of Horrors, but all the performers were incredible. And it was my first time actually seeing that show. I didn't really know it super well before, so I'm glad I did.
I got to see a performance of that up here in Canada sometime in my high school career. I'm going to say grade 10 or 11 or something, and kind of fell in love with the show, even though I can see its faults very clearly, even listening to it nowadays. For some reason, it's one of those weird ones. I feel like it's my version of My Fair Lady to Sondheim, who says, I shouldn't like this show, but I really like this show for some reason. Little Shop of Horrors is like that for me, which is like, there's a lot of things that shouldn't work, or like on paper shouldn't work, and yet somehow I really like the show a lot.
I think you can kind of tell it's a show written by people who are less experienced in writing shows, let's say. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I think that also is part of its charm. It is just this sort of small, quirky show. So the fact that it has a few faults, I think, just adds to that quirkiness.
Now, I guess segueing into Company, how familiar are you with this show?
I wasn't super familiar with it before preparing for this podcast, but I had heard of it. I kind of knew the idea that it was a review of this man trying to understand the point of, I guess, love and marriage. And I think, to be honest, I was a little hesitant about listening to it because a lot of what I've heard about it is a lot of people don't seem to really understand it or connect with it until they're much older.
No, that is true.
Yeah. And I do think you had a guest earlier, I don't remember which one, who mentioned that this was the first Sondheim that they heard when they were 10 or something, and they fell in love with it. So I was like, oh, well, maybe there's a chance. But I actually really liked it. I think it's still hugely relevant, if not more so today, and the dating culture today. And I did watch the Neil Patrick Harris version.
Oh, good.
And yeah, and so
that's a pretty good version of it, actually.
It's still very modern. really.
Yeah.
Like none of it feels super outdated or anything.
That's actually the wild thing about it. Like, besides the fact that people are using phones, I think most of everything that they're talking about is something that people deal with even now. So I think you're right. It's one of those very rare shows that seems to have gotten even more relevant as it's gotten older, instead of being like, well, if you think about it in its time,
Right.
one of those types of shows.
And it's not like Anyone Can Whistle has also kind of gotten more relevant with like politics and government, but it's just the way that they portray everyday lives is still the same kind of everyday life that we have now too, which is
Right.
kind of crazy to think about.
So I'm actually just really curious, because we didn't talk about this beforehand. Like, how did you listen to the show? Did you listen to like the original Broadway cast like fully first, or did you just listen to the songs? Like, how did you approach Company if you hadn't really listened to it much before?
Right. I think about a year ago, I actually tried listening to the original Broadway cast, which was, I think, when I had first heard about the new revival where they gender swapped it.
Right.
And so I was like, all right, well, I want to see what that revival is all about. So let me just listen to the original one, and then I can sort of get used to it. I couldn't really get super into it then. And I think it's also a quirk with Sondheim, where the first time I listened to any Sondheim album, it's very hard to just get into. And then so I sort of gave up on that until like about like a month or two ago, and I started going back to it, and I was like, all right, let me just put this on repeat a few times, because that normally does a trick for most Sondheim shows. And yeah, I just sort of got more into that and watched the I got into that, and then I also listened to the Raúl Esparza version, I think 2011, which has a lot more dialogue, which I think helps string it together a little better to more understand what it's about.
I can't remember if it was with you or not. Everything blurs together now. I've been doing this for too long. But the Raúl Esparza version of Company is actually exactly what I wished most original Broadway cast had, which is a little bit more dialogue leading into the songs.
Yeah.
Because it does flesh out. I'm like, oh, okay, I kind of get what's going on then leading up to this, instead of it just being the songs by themselves.
Right. Yeah. I think it does a really good job of framing each song because it's this style of show where each song is kind of its own scene. I think it really lends itself well to being able to do that. So yeah, that listening to that recording helped a lot. And then I watched the Neil Patrick Harris version, which it's interesting how differently he plays Bobby from how the other recordings play Bobby, I felt.
And did you have a chance to listen to like the 2008 version?
I only listened...
Or sorry, 2018 version is what I meant to say.
I only listened to this song on that recording.
Okay.
You Could Drive a Person Crazy. But and that's the only one I've heard so far. But I will listen to it eventually.
Yeah, it's just interesting because I think that broadly, by changing Bobby into a woman, there's a lot of stuff that stays the same, but there's some certain things that like, oh, this either works, I think, really well, or things that's like, oh, this feels like they're really trying to kind of shoehorn this into working. But overall, I'm glad that they did it, because I think it's a very interesting take on the source material. But let's get into You Could Drive a Person Crazy. This is the song that the girlfriends get to sing, or I suppose the boyfriends in the 2018 version. So let me get some credit where credit's due. Let me get through all these credits here first. So the girlfriends, their names are Kathy, April, and Marta. The people who have played Kathy in the past was Donna McKechnie from the original Broadway cast, Kelly Jean Grant from the 2006 version, and then it was Matthew Season Young from the 2018 version. They renamed Kathy to Theo in that one. And then April is played by Susan Browning in the original Broadway cast, Elizabeth Stanley in the 2006 revival, and then Richard Fleischman in the 2018 revival, although renamed to Andy in this case. And then finally we have Marta, played by Pamela Myers in the original Broadway cast, Angel Desai in the 2006 version, and George Blagden in the 2018 revival, but renamed to PJ instead of Marta. So that's the whole thing. The other big warning I'm going to give, if people are not aware, or if you've not listened to the original Broadway cast in a while, because they use the original lyrics in that one, there is going to be a homophobic slur I'm going to be using partway through. I'll preface it when that's about to happen again, but I'm just kind of doing this broad announcement instead of that kind of sneaking up on you. If you're not that down to hear that specifically, so you can skip over that part. But I'll be clear when we're about to get to that. I should just ask, just very broadly, Christine, what do you think about this song?
I think it's a really, I guess, like cute song.
Yeah.
And it is it's a pastiche of the Andrews sisters.
Right.
And I think I read that he specifically chose this kind of genre because it sounds very lighthearted but they're actually talking about sort of all of Bobby's failings and how terrible of a boyfriend he is. And so it's a little bit of that contrast that I think Sondheim really likes to play with. And it has very sort of flowy lyrics. Like the lyrics flow into each other really well. They just paint a good picture of at least how these past girlfriends see Bobby.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because this is a very specific decision to be doing this like light and airy music, but having very, I don't know, pointed and negative lyrics at the same time. So definitely he's playing that off of one another. I'll be honest, the very first time I heard this song was when I first was listening to Company, and it's like you have those first few songs that play, and then this comes on, like, wait a second, what is going on? Like, it totally changes the tone. It fits in the show very well. Like, it leads up to this point, I think, fairly good. But when you're just listening to the music, it seems to kind of come out of nowhere a little bit.
Right. I will say the first time I heard this was actually in the MCC Miscast Gala when they had the 3 actors from the SpongeBob musical do it, and I was like, oh, what song is this?
He's crazy, he's a troubled person, he's a truly crazy person himself. Oh, you son of a bitch.
Here comes the loser.
I'm not a loser.
When a person's personality is person of doo-doo-doo, shouldn't ought to sit like a lump. Doo-doo-doo.
Tired of that, I'm at an coerced, try to get you off of your rump. A single and attractive and attentive a man is everything a person could wish.
And so then later I was like, oh, I guess it's from Company. Well, see how it's normally done. And so it came as, I guess, less of a culture shock because I had already known what was coming. But once I heard the rest of Company, it did seem a little bit out of nowhere at first.
Mm-hmm. And I think something that you said here before, too, the nice thing about the 2006 version with Raúl Esparza is that there's a lead up, so you understand that what Bobby has just said is that, hey, I'm totally ready for marriage. And then these 3 girlfriends are like, then why haven't you asked us yet? Like, they seem to be pretty mad at the fact that he would even say such a thing. So here's how the song begins. The 3 girlfriends, they go like this: do 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 do. Do 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 do. You could drive a person crazy. You could drive a person mad. Do do do. First, you make a person hazy, so a person could be had. Do do do. Then you leave a person dangling, sadly, outside your door, which it only makes a person gladly want you even more.
You could drive a person crazy. You could drive a person mad. First you make a person hazy, so a person could be had. Then you leave a person dangling, sadly, outside your door, which it only makes a person gladly want to even more.
Here's the first thing I'm just going to bring up about these lyrics. The 3 different versions are interesting because you have those do-do-do's that I just did. But in the 2006 version, because it's a stripped down interpretation of the song, removes those and it's just instruments that play instead. And then for some reason in the 2018 version with the men, they don't say do-do-do, they say ba-da-da. They do like a different nonsense word. This is like the weirdest sentence I've ever said out loud, I just realized. But yeah, it's a little bit different the way that they frame that. What works for you the best?
I do like the do-do-do's. I think it just gives it a little more character. But I believe with the 2018 version, I think they tried to make it more of a barbershop, I guess, trio instead of quartet. And that seems, the way that they changed the harmonies and some of the bylines seems to adjust it in that direction, which I think makes sense because you wouldn't really find 3 straight guys singing in the same style that it's originally done in, I think. I'm assuming that's why they made that change.
That's yeah, I hadn't thought about that actually, but I think you might be right. I think that because the gender has changed, they do need to slightly I guess alter those so it makes it sound right? There's a very big difference between girl groups and men groups, traditionally at least, and like kind of how they present themselves. But I'm curious, are there any lines from this first part that jump out at you at all?
Yeah, I think the part where they just sort of talk about Bobby, they say first you make a person hazy so a person could be had.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting choice of words, I think, because I think also it's sort of pointing to when you first meet someone and you don't really know them, but you feel like that connection, but like you kind of avoid any sort of red flags. You're like, oh, let me just jump into this sort of relationship or something. That might be what he means by make a person hazy, but it also seems as if Bobby is sort of on purpose trying to sort of lure people in or something like that. It's a little confusing what that line means to me.
No, I'm aligned with you there. I think like when you first start those relationships, you have those, of course, like little butterfly feelings and stuff that you have. And so, yeah, you have that like hazy feeling when you start going out with them. And it seems what they're kind of, I don't know, suggesting here is that he's intentionally making them hazy so that they can basically sleep together. I guess a little bit more like ulterior motive instead of there being that real connection. That's what I've always read it as meaning, but that's, I don't know, that's what I think.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And that mostly seems to align with Bobby's character. Mm-hmm. And then I guess the rest of that stanza, when you leave a person dangling sadly outside your door, it's kind of like he doesn't really follow through with the rest of the relationship. It's just kind of that first step. And then like, all right, cool, I don't want to go any farther. So...
Well, yeah, I think you can read this in a couple different ways, and that the dangling outside your door, is that them coming to his door and he leaves them standing there because he's either off with somebody else or like intentionally makes them wait, or is that, after they spend a night together, them like leaving I guess the apartment, closing the door and standing there sadly. Like, I'm curious, like at which point they're actually referring to.
Yeah,
because either way, I think it's it points to him taking the good stuff of the relationship, but not really wanting to go further into the relationship.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think both are pretty valid, since I think Bobby's a sort of complex character that I still can't really get a hold of, and he also possibly just doesn't know what he wants through most of the show, and so it's hard to figure out what his motivation is with each individual girl too, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we might as well have this conversation now. I had it written down in my notes anyways, but it is that idea of like, how are we supposed to interpret the character of Bobby in the first place? And I guess I'll just bring up my thing, and then I'd love to hear your feedback on it, because for me, the way that I've always read it is that Bobby is actually a very scared character, in that he wants to go further, but is so, I don't know, emotionally arrested that he's not able to. Like, he almost self-destructs himself right at the point where he does want to go further, or thinks that he can, then he starts to push people away. Like, it seems like with his personal relationships, like his friends, he's like their rock, and they always mention like how he's always there and he's the shoulder to cry on, and he always has great advice. Yet for romantic relationships, it seems like the exact opposite reaction that those people are having. It was like, you're cold, you're distant, you're not there when I need you to be. So there's like these two sides of this exact same person. And so for me, it points to a guy who is incredibly unsure of himself and thinks that being in a relationship means giving up a part of you, and that scares him a lot. And maybe that's just me being super self-reflective and projecting myself onto Bobby, but that's what it feels like to me.
I think with this show, it's a little bit hard not to project yourself and your experiences on it either way. And the thing that confuses me about Bobby is that I think he is all the things you said, but at the same time, he seems to really be trying to go through the motions and trying to get out there. Like, he's like, I'm dating these 3 different girls, I'm seeing people, I'm ready to get married. He seems to be like telling himself this story that he is ready for commitment. But then the other thing that I found interesting was he seems to be really good friends with people he had dated in the past. Like, I think Jenny was one of them. Joanne, he has a little bit of a strange relationship with. I mean, Kathy also falls under that umbrella too, where they're very good friends, but they also have this kind of murky relationship in this past. And so I think just Bobby seems to be in a lot of places at the same time. And it's hard to tell whether he actually wants a relationship or wants a relationship for the sake of wanting a relationship, or just wants one because all his friends are in relationships. And I think it could actually just be read any of the ways, just depending on how the actor or actress plays Bobby.
Yeah, I think that's the clearest thing. I think it is very clear that Bobby is truly a cipher for the audience. There's not a whole lot of specifics necessarily give to him, or like a grandiose backstory up to this point that we're seeing him in. So yeah, you can kind of read it however you want. Because of that, it kind of leads to the being alive moment at the very end of the show, where he's finally ready and he understands it and he has that like outpouring of emotion. To me, it's like this closed off guy, and I think that part of the issue is that he himself doesn't even really know what he wants. Because I think you're right in that he is going through the motions a lot of this. He's kind of doing that really gross thing where he's dating 3 people at the same time, but it's like, well, I like this person, but I would never take them home to see my parents type of thing. But this is the one I'm probably going to ask to marry me. And like, so there's a lot of stupid male ego that's kind of wrapped up into his character as well, while still being vulnerable enough to realize that he does need someone in his life and he wants to have somebody in his life, but he doesn't know how to take that next step.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So what they say here, what the girlfriends say, right, is like, when they are being left outside the door, that it only makes a person gladly want you even more. And I just want to know your personal feeling on that, because I know I have people and friends that when they get, I don't know, rejected, like that for some reason makes them more interested in that person. I personally have never found this to be true. I've always found that to be like a complete turnoff, but I don't know, is that something that I'm just weird and missing?
I think, it's this whole idea of playing hard to get, right? And so I think it just depends how it happens. Like if, we had those sort of 2 different instances of leaving someone outside your door, whether it's like at the end of the night before you take them home or something, or if it's like the night or the morning after. And I think it sort of depends on which one it is. And I don't think I've really experienced this either, of wanting someone more after rejection, unless it seems like it's a very clear, like, let's kind of go slowly sort of thing, which I think is a different ball game. But the other thing about this line, I think it kind of plays into this idea that for whatever reason, all the females in this show seem to really want to take care of Bobby. Like that shows up later in Poor Baby. All his female friends are trying to find him a partner. And I think it also helps build up to that realization later in the show when he's like, well, who am I going to take care of? But it seems like even if his girlfriends are frustrated with him, they're still like, oh, well, like maybe he's just, misunderstood, or maybe he needs to work through his issues. But I want to be the person to feel special in that I was able to help him, or it's that sort of like when someone's like quote unquote broken and you want to be the person to fix them, is how I think I see this.
No, that's smart. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that before, but I think you're right. I think it's feeding into that dynamic of, yeah, he's not being great to me, but I'm going to be the person who changes his mind.
Yeah,
and those always end great, those relationships.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, moving on. This is going to be the part, by the way, where I'm going to be using a homophobic slur. So if you are not down for that, you might want to skip ahead about 5 minutes or so. So in the original Broadway production, the next lines go, I could understand a person if it's not a person's bag. I could understand a person if a person was a fag. That's what they say in the original production. And it's actually recorded that way. You can listen to it.
I could understand a person if it's not a person's bag to do. I could understand a person if a person was a fag to do.
However, in, I think it was 1995. Yes, in 1995, Sondheim writes in the book Finishing the Hat, when the show was first revived in 1995, it sounded not only offensive, but old-fashioned, so he changed it. And so what he changed it and updated it to was, I could understand a person if he said to go away. I could understand a person if he happened to be gay. And then they do the do-do-dos. But worse than that, a person that titillates a person and then leaves her flat is crazy. He's a troubled person. He's a truly crazy person himself.
Even more, I could understand a person if she said to go away. Ba-da-da. I could understand a person if she happened to be gay. You think?
Do I know? Nah.
But worse than that, a person that titillates a person and then leaves him flat is crazy. She's a troubled person. She's a truly crazy person herself.
So I guess the broad conversation I want to have here is the original composer understanding how words have changed and then actually changing the lyrics themselves. Like, he seems to be on the ball enough to be like, okay, like in 1970 people use that willy-nilly, but nowadays that's just not gonna fly. So how can I actually update this, still make it feel modern, and go from there? I guess my first overall, do you think that Sondheim should have changed the lyric, or are you glad that he did?
I think I'm glad that he did change the lyric. I don't know in the context of the 70s if that was still considered like as much of a slur as it is now, but it seemed a bit strange to me that it was in there in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it is just the difference in language, but because we have mentioned how sort of modern this piece as a whole still feels, I think it was a good idea to change it and just sort of keep you feeling that modernness.
Mm-hmm.
And just keep it relevant, I guess.
I was not alive in the 1970s, by even not even close to being born in the 70s. But maybe I'm wrong. It just feels like such a stark word to use, just like glibly. I find in the lyrics themselves. It always jumped out at me. It's like, oh, whoa, that's what they just said. But yeah, I am happy. I personally am also happy that he updated those lyrics. I think gay, saying is Bobby gay, it still brings about that idea into the song without it being like calling too much attention to itself. Which brings up the other question that is constantly being asked this season. Do you have the reading that Bobby is a gay character?
I think in the Neil Patrick Harris version, just because it's Neil Patrick Harris playing him.
Yeah.
And I couldn't in that video, I feel like that was the one that confused me most about Bobby's character. And I do think that if there is sort of a reading of Bobby being gay, it's partially because he just doesn't seem to understand women or what women want in a relationship.
Yeah.
And so he might find it easier to deal with men, which I think is true of many men sometimes have this issue.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's bewildered by this idea of like lifelong commitment and marriage, then he kind of just holds his girlfriends at an arm's length, seems to be more familiar with, either girls that are already married or his male friends. But I don't think I necessarily saw him as gay in particular, or like wanting to have a relationship with a man.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely play around with it, I think, a little bit more in that Neil Patrick Harris version that they had, because everyone knows that Neil Patrick Harris is gay. But definitely in any other version that I've watched, and there's actually quite a few on YouTube that you can watch, like the full productions of, it never seems to be the driving force. I know a lot of people have that reading of the show. I never really have. That would be an interesting take, I think, at some point, maybe, if they really wanted to lean into that idea. It's just not something that I've necessarily ever thought was something that they were trying to bring across. I forget who it is. I always get the characters mixed up. It's Peter or Paul, who he's talking with later in the show, that there is that undercurrent of homosexuality going on almost, and then they kind of break that tension. It's like, oh, you're just kidding around, right?
Right.
Which I can't verify, because in a comment section they said that they only did that for the Neil Patrick Harris version, which is a complete lie, because they did it in the Raúl Esparza version too. But I don't know if that's in the original Broadway version. So I don't actually know when they brought that specific scene into play. Regardless, I still think it's something that you could play around with if you wanted to.
Yeah, and I think there was talk when they were casting the Broadway version, this upcoming Broadway revival, and I think a lot of people wanted Bobby to be portrayed as bisexual, and they
Right.
were wondering if one of the characters in this song would be a woman,
Mhm.
which didn't happen. But I think there was that undercurrent of a lot of people wanting to see what that would be like and what that dynamic might be like.
I think that is inevitable to happen at some point, whether it is a male or a female Bobby. I think playing around with that would actually be an interesting idea, as, I don't know, ideas around sexuality and gender norms are kind of starting to break away, which I'm
Right.
totally in favor of. I'm just saying that doing something along with that, I think, again, continues to make company very relevant. And it speaks to what that dating life is like when you're bisexual, because you have both genders that you're going after, or all genders that you're going after, and how do you play around with that? So I'm sure it's going to happen some point.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so now we get to another section that is sometimes controversial in a very much different way. So the character of Kathy starts, when a person's personality is personable, he shouldn't ought to sit like a lump. It's harder than a matador coercing a bull to try to get you off of your rump. So single and attentive and attractive a man is everything a person could wish, but turning off a person is the act of a man who likes to pull the hooks out of fish.
When a person's personality is personable, you should not sit like a lump. It's harder than a matador coercing a bull to try to get you off of your rump. So single and attentive and attractive a man is everything a person could wish, but turning off a person is the act of a man who likes to pull the hooks out of fish.
I should just mention that they do slightly change those lyrics here in the 2018 revival, where they say, when a person's personality is personable, you shouldn't ought to sit on her butt. It's harder than a matador coercing a bull to try and get you out of your rut. So single and attentive and attractive a chick is everything a person could wish, but turning off a person is the act of a chick who likes to pull the hooks out of fish.
When a person's personality is personable, she should not sit in her butt. It's harder than a matador coercing a bull to try to get you out of your rut.
So here's the first thing. Let's get it out of the way. The controversial part that I was mentioning here is the coercionable rhyming with personable line, which I have seen alternatively described as one of Sondheim's best lyrics playing around with language, and also one of the worst lyrics he's ever done, because they groan about how forced it feels. So I don't know, which side of the line do you fall in there?
I think it's an incredible rhyme.
I do too. I love it. I think it's great, but I have to pay attention to the people who really do not like it.
I think because of the way the song flows and how like sort of snappy the lyrics are, or how snappy the song makes the lyrics feel, it doesn't feel as forced to me as, I mean, like, if you just listen through it, I didn't notice anything in particular about it until I actually looked at the lyrics. I was like, wow, that's a cool rhyme there.
Uh-huh.
You got to have some respect for Sondheim trying to keep to those perfect rhymes instead of doing a slant rhyme.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, he even writes about this too in the Finishing the Hat book, where he says that you have to be careful with these types of rhymes, because trick rhymes invest the character who sings them with a certain amount of wit. He gives the example of the Major General song in The Pirates of Penzance.
Uh-huh.
I am the very model of a modern major general. I've information, vegetable, animal, and mineral. I know the kings of England, and I quote the facts historical from Marathon to Waterloo in order categorical. I'm very well acquainted too with matters mathematical. I understand equations both as simple and quadratical. About binomial theorem, I'm teeming with a lot of news. Lot of news. Got it. With the many cheerful facts about the square of the hypotenuse.
But he says, like, they also can draw the attention of the author if you're not good enough. If it looks like you're really forcing it, then people are like, oh, whoa, what is going on? But he says, like, he feels like he got away with it, even though he would never have Kathy say that line if it was not being sung, which somewhat breaks some of his own rules, that he doesn't like to have people sing something that they wouldn't necessarily say out loud. But I don't know. Overall, I still think it works in the context of the song.
Yeah, and I kind of like the Matador and Bull, which very vaguely ties into Barcelona later.
Yeah, no, that's a good call.
So even though it's a different person, but I mean, April is also in this song, even if she doesn't sing the line.
I mean, you could even go further with that, I suppose. Like, basically giving the analogy of dating as if you're a matador trying to kill this like huge ferocious animal.
Yeah.
I'm sure you could play around with that. The big one here though is that kind of like that last line that says likes to pull the hooks out of fish. I don't know if I've ever really understood what that means necessarily. I don't know if you have any ideas.
I kind of just saw that as almost a torture method.
Okay.
Like when you go fishing, you do have to pull the hooks out of fish. But I feel like most people probably don't enjoy that because they're squeamish or because,
okay.
you know. And so I saw that as like, oh, you like seeing people suffer. Or like, you know, like if you bring, so like Bobby is, you know, single and attentive and attractive, but then turning off a person is the act of a man. So they get turned off by him, or like he does something where like the previous verse where he leaves them flat and he seems to keep doing that. So they're like, oh, well, you must like seeing people suffer or seeing people uncomfortable is how I interpret
I can see that. Yeah. So it's a turnoff when it appears that you actually enjoy hurting people around you, or in this case, the bunch of fish that you've been fishing for. That's interesting. I like that. I like that reading a lot. I do want to talk a little bit about these updated lyrics for the 2018 version, because I don't know. How do you feel about them changing man to chick, first of all?
I guess they had to change it.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's a better way to change it.
I don't know how you feel about it, because again, there's a lot of stuff wrapped up into words and word choice and that sort of thing. I just don't know why they didn't stick with girl. Like, so single and attentive and attractive a girl. I mean, I guess they're trying to do man instead, so they're trying to think of something that's about the same, I don't know, weight to it.
I think one of the things that I noticed about the 2018 version of this song is that it's very chilling in a way, how these, you know, three straight men are talking about this one girl. And it seems like they feel very entitled, or very, you know, very sort of like that, almost that toxic masculinity idea. Yeah. And so I feel like the choice of chick instead of girl is also just like, you know, when you call people a chick, or when you say like, oh, that chick over there. Yeah. It's a little bit, not quite demeaning, but a little bit, it has a different connotation, which I can see if there's like, you know, three, let's say, very successful men who are like in a slight position of power, would kind of be cavalier about how they refer to a girl that they're dating.
You know, it's interesting, and this is really my own biases, I guess, coming up to the forefront, is I think that you just verbalizing that, I understand why I'm resistant to this song in the 2018 version specifically, because in the other two versions, because it's three women singing, I've always felt bad for them in the situation. Yeah. And in the updated version, I start to feel bad for Bobby in this situation. It's like, why are these weird guys like talking down to her in such a way? So I think that is part of the reason why this song kind of frustrated me when I first listened to it in the 2018 version, because it's like, whoa, wait a second, I'm supposed to be feeling bad for you, but I'm not.
Yeah, I think they definitely lean into that more, and it's interesting how the gender dynamics change a bit. Where if it's a man who, like, you know, goes on a date with someone, and if they were expecting sex but don't get there, then it feels different than if a woman was the one who like didn't want to have sex or something like that. And like the men feel more like, oh, well, you're just a tease now. And then rather than woman like feeling sorry for the man or something like that, like we talked about in the first stanza.
No, that's true. Okay, well, we continue on here with them all coming back together, going, knock, knock, is anybody there? Knock, knock, it really isn't fair. Knock, knock, I'm working all my charms. Knock, knock, a zombie's in my arms. All that sweet affection, what is wrong? Where's the loose connection? How long, oh Lord, how long? Bobby, baby, Bobby, Bobby, Bobby.
Knock, knock, is anybody there? Knock, knock, it really isn't fair. Knock, knock, I'm working all my charms. Knock, knock, a zombie's in my arms. All that sweet affection, what is wrong? Where's the loose connection? How long, oh Lord, how long? Bobby, baby, Bobby, booby, Bobby, you could drive a person.
Now, this is why I love doing this show so much, is because now that I've been talking with you for a while, I've always wondered why they do like the little knock knock phrase, but it's like, oh, it's probably just a reference back to the fact that they're standing outside his door earlier in the song, so that makes sense. I also have to call out, just because it drove me crazy, they mispronounce booby in the 2006 version with Raúl Esparza. They say booby.
I don't think I noticed that. Oh, okay. I'll have to listen for that.
Yeah, listen to it again. Maybe I'm just going mad because there's this kind of famous documentary that they made about the recording sessions of the original. I don't know if you've ever seen that
I
at all.
haven't, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, if you look up, you can find scenes on YouTube, but there's a specific scene where Sondheim is talking to the three women in the original Broadway cast about this, and one of them is like, I'm saying this word wrong. He's like, yes, you are. And he's like, and he coaches her on how to say this word right. So it's like imprinted in my mind how they're supposed to be saying it. It's booby. Yeah, but they say booby in the 2006 version. It drives me nuts.
Bobby, baby, Bobby, booby, Bobby.
Anyways, that's just a small little nitpick on my part. Yeah, I don't know. What anything that you want to mention about these two stanzas?
I think I actually didn't think of that knocking as related to the door that you mentioned earlier. I thought it was actually a callback to like phone rings, door chimes.
Oh,
and
yeah, okay.
So it's like for maybe like when you have friends over. I mean, I don't know. I think I might be making this up, but when it's the friends, it's like the doorbell is chiming. When it's like a potential lover, it's someone knocking. But then also when they say, where's that loose connection? Like, you know, phone rings, if they can't get a connection, they can't get a hold of him. He's not responding to any of their charms or their affection. So that felt kind of like a callback to that for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I'm definitely biased here, but Sondheim is too good to just let some of these things just pass him by. He's very intentionally bringing back those hooks from earlier songs, or even earlier in this song, however you want to read that. I will say that, again, I think even to this day, it feels a little weird for them to bring up a zombie into this song. And I don't know why, because, I mean, you can use zombie in as a turn of phrase, and it means exactly what they're saying here, you know?
The term zombie seems very modern, even though it obviously isn't. And it's
yeah, definitely in this, I'm trying to think, like, it would have felt even more modern, I think, in 1970, because I think the original Night of the Living Dead, which was like technically like the first time or something they used that word, was, yeah, like maybe a few years before this. I could also be making that up, but I feel you're right. Like, it's not something that's been around for a long time.
Yeah, and they do use some like old terminology. Like later they say buggy, which, you know, no one really says anymore.
No.
So I think the idea of like zombie, and zombie is also not a very, I guess, like romantic word.
Right.
The rest of the words are all kind of like, you know, very common words that you would use in talking about romance or something like that. And zombie just seems to stand out.
Yeah, because, I mean, what it's supposed to mean is that he's like this cold and unfeeling thing in their arms, right? But I think our more prevalent way that we interpret the word zombie is something that's coming to eat your brains, right? Like, that is what a zombie does. That's what their modus operandi is. And that's not really what they're mentioning here. There's none of that like horror movie or horror literature context coming into here. It's just the idea of like a dead person or a dead being kind of being in your life, sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. Just cold and unresponsive.
Okay. Well, the last bit goes like this. You could drive a person buggy. You could blow a person's cool. Like, you make a person feel all huggy while you make her look a fool. When a person says that you've upset her, that's when you're good. You impersonate a person better than a zombie should. I could understand a person if he wasn't good in bed. I could understand a person if he actually was dead. Exclusive you, elusive you. Will any person ever get the juice of you? You're crazy. You're a lovely person. You're a moving, deeply maladjusted, never to be trusted, crazy person yourself. And they all get together and say one of my favorite lines, Bobby is my hobby and I'm giving it up.
Bobby, you could drive a person frantic. You could blow a person's cool. Like you get a person all romantic while you make him feel a fool. But when a person says you just don't get her, that's when you're good. You impersonate a person better than a a zombie should. I could understand a person if she wasn't good in bed. She's good. No shit. I could understand a person if she actually was dead. Ba-da-da-da. Exclusive you, elusive you. Will any person ever get the juice of you? You're crazy. You're a troubled person. You're a moving, deeply maladjusted, never to be trusted, crazy person. Yourself. Bobby is my hobby and I'm giving it up.
So that's how the song ends. The biggest thing that I want to call out here is one of my absolute favorite lines, and it's become one of my favorite lines from listening to this song a whole lot over the last couple weeks and listening to the different versions and rereading these lyrics countless numbers of times. But when they say the juice of you, and again, this is me classically overreading things more than likely, but I love the idea that it's like, will any person ever get the juice of you? Because it is like your essence. Bobby is this thing that they're trying to figure out, and it's like, why can't you be like, I don't know, this orange or some fruit where I can literally like get the essence to come out of you? And it's just a slight turn of phrase that's very economical with word choice. It's like a great Sondheimism where this has a different meaning from the very literal interpretation of it. I don't know. It's a great line. I love it a lot.
Yeah, and it's kind of just like getting more than just getting under the skin, kind of like getting more than skin deep.
Right.
I think it's another one of those things where it seems like it should be a commonly used phrase. I don't know if it is. I'm assuming Sondheim made that up, and it didn't
get to the level of coming up roses, but right. I mean, it's close for me in my heart.
Yeah, and there's that kind of sort of triple internal rhyme with exclusive, elusive, and juice of.
Yes, I know. Thank you for bringing that out too. It's just like those quick little ways. I mean, it's just about as good as coerced in the bowl, but it's like so it's just slipped in there, and it feels so natural. One of the things I've always loved about Sondheim is that oftentimes he can make lyrics that if you just spoke them aloud would still kind of work. And this, I think, is a good example of that.
Yeah.
A couple other things here that I wanted to call out. I could understand a person if he actually was dead. Again, a kind of a callback to the zombie aspect of things. I can understand you being mean and mean-spirited here if you actually were just a dead person that was in my life. But the very final bit here, it's like, you're a lovely person, you're a moving but deeply maladjusted, never to be trusted. It's one of those things. It's like it's not me, it's you is basically what they're saying here. I find, which is like, you are a lovely person. You're very nice. This is like the example of, it's like, oh, they're such a nice person, but don't trust them. They're not to be trusted.
Yeah, and I think he must be very charming, which we do see snatches of. I think in the productions, but sometimes the people who are the most charming are also the most like insincere and the most like there's a reason they're charming, and it's because they may not be trustworthy. Which is it's kind of a bleak view, but like one of the hallmarks of like serial killers is not of psychopaths is that they are like very charming and they know how to use that to their advantage.
Right.
But
like this could very quickly turn into like the American Psycho musical or something like that if you weren't careful.
Though also to go back a bit, I think the part where they say you make a person feel all huggy while you make her feel a fool.
Right.
I think that's also a very sort of gendered idea where like the gender stereotypes are like men want sex and women want affection. And it seems like, which seems to kind of hold up in this. Like the woman in this song are like, well, you don't want commitment, you make people want you more, but then they feel foolish for doing so because you're obviously not on the same page, even though you say you want marriage and all of that. So I thought that was an interesting thing to add there.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because I would have accidentally gone past this. This is also another thing that they update in the 2018 version. They don't say that. They say instead, you could drive a person frantic, you could blow a person's cool, like you get a person all romantic while you make them feel a fool. Which I actually I guess I don't know how I feel about this. Like the huggy and buggy thing, you're right. I don't know how, like, that is the one time where, like, that feels old-fashioned to kind of say that instead of it being, like, a modern person saying it. So in that case, I actually really do like the 2018 update to those lyrics. I don't know.
I do think it is more true to the male sort of point of view, too, where it can seem like frantic and romantic, I think, are more apt terms, I guess, for a male point of view. And like they wouldn't really say like, oh, I get huggy, even if that were a term that were used today.
Well, I think it also, again, feeds into that toxic masculinity a little bit, which is, while they were kind of in that blaming mode where it's like, you get a person all romantic and then you make them feel like a fool when you don't want to like continue going on with that. So
right.
Again, it kind of feeds into that personality of the three boyfriends in that case.
Mm-hmm.
Something I know that you wanted to bring up here, and I do want to talk about it, especially because we talked about another time where Sondheim updated lyrics to make them more relevant, is the use of the word crazy in this song. So what would you like to say about that?
Yeah, so here it's all the girlfriends in this case talking about how you could drive a person crazy in terms of talking about themselves. And then, we mentioned at the end, they're kind of turning it around and saying, well, it's because you're crazy. And I think a lot in culture, crazy is a way to sort of just diminish someone into being like, oh, well, they're crazy. Like, I don't talk to them. Like, it's kind of a catch-all term. Right. And I thought it was interesting how he uses it in the other songs too. Like in the opening number, he says, all these other crazy people, my married friends. So he's like, well, all of my married friends, they're crazy. Like they got married. Yeah. That's a crazy thing to do. And then in Side by Side, the chorus sings like, we're so crazy, he's so sane. And later on, Bobby also says, like, I think it's like, open the church, open the steeple, look at all these crazy married people. It's also just a way of like, well, he's sort of denouncing this idea of marriage as like a crazy thing to do. Who would ever want to do that? He also calls Amy crazy, and Amy's the one who is very skittish about getting married. And so I thought it was interesting how that's woven through. That's such an
insightful thing, though, I think, because I think what you're pointing at is that there's this subtle thing happening even in the audience. Maybe they wouldn't even be able to verbalize it, but it is like we're using crazy almost every time relationships get mentioned, whether it's a married relationship or even getting a little bit more serious in a girlfriend-boyfriend situation. That where crazy starts to come up. It's like, oh yeah, like the couples are the real crazy ones here.
Mm-hmm. And I did want to ask, are you familiar with the TV show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend?
I was working hard at a New York job making dough, but it made me blue. One day I was crying a lot, and so I decided to move to West Covina, California. Brand new pals and new career. It happens to be where Josh lives, but that's not why I'm here.
She's the crazy ex-girlfriend.
What? No, I'm not.
She's the crazy ex-girlfriend.
That's a sexist term.
She's the crazy ex-girlfriend.
Can you guys stop singing for just a second?
She's so broken inside.
The situation's a lot more nuanced than that.
C-R-A-Z-Y.
Okay, we get it.
Crazy ex-girlfriend.
Well, I know of it. I've never seen a single episode, though.
Okay. So it is this like musical TV show. Every episode they have like 2 or so original numbers. And it's written by Rachel Bloom. She writes it, stars in it, and writes the music. But
that's just not fair to be that talented.
Yeah, I know, right? And I mean, slight tangent, but she has all these guest stars. Like Santino Fontana plays the male lead in the first season. Patti LuPone has a guest star role. Lea Salonga has a guest starring role. So it is like quite a cast. But I bring it up because the third season, the theme, like each season kind of has a theme in this main character's arc. And the third season is sort of breaking down this idea of what is a crazy ex-girlfriend. And that's sort of a derivative term. And the theme song for the third season actually talks about like the different uses of crazy in pop culture. And so there's that idea of like, oh, it's like my crazy ex-girlfriend. They're like unhinged. They, wanted crazy things like, let's say, marriage or something is, I feel like how that term's used. But also there's this idea of being like crazy in love, or I'm crazy for this person, which I thought related in an interesting way to this song. Like you could drive a person crazy. Obviously, all 3 of these women had very had sort of a relationship with Bobby. And we see afterwards, like Kathy and Bobby, they had both considered the idea of marriage with each other. April did have another connection with Bobby. And so I feel like the idea of you could drive a person crazy, it could mean like you could drive a person insane, like getting on their nerves, but also it could mean like you could drive a person crazy and that they somehow become like crazily in love with you and that idea. So I thought that was an interesting term to use, and just the multitude of ways that it could be interpreted.
Crazy is when I go off the rails. This is what you've done to me. Crazy is how your loving makes me feel. This is what I always wanna be. I like it when a girl gets crazy in bed.
Don't mess with a bitch who's crazy in the head.
You don't wanna be crazy, and you don't wanna be crazy. To clarify, yes, no, I'm not crazy. We hope this helps.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can use that word to mean so many different things depending on the context you're using it in. And yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of the genius of it, of how it's used at different points throughout the show to sometimes signify slightly different things. No, I like that. I have to ruminate on that a little bit more to feel. I have. I guess I hadn't anticipated asking this, but because we're on that subject. Again, sometimes one of the criticisms of Company is the resolution at the very end. Like, it's sometimes obtuse. We don't know necessarily how to read it. I've always seen it as him coming in to his birthday party where everyone's left, of him actually having made that decision after being alive, and he's going to go and pursue at least one of the two girlfriends that remain. A, I don't know if you agree with that interpretation, but B, do you think that he actually ends up with any one of these girlfriends at the very end?
I feel like if he does, Marta might be the only real option.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the birthday party is actually a little confusing because they seem to like redo the birthday party a couple of times.
Yeah,
like,
that's the thing. I think you're supposed to see like it's the same birthday party but different timelines, I guess.
Yeah, and I feel like each song almost is its own dream ballet. Like, this song is kind of a dream ballet. Side by Side can kind of be seen as a dream ballet. TikTok is like the actual, I guess, dream ballet. But they don't do ballet, I think, but the idea stands.
That's the idea.
So
for sure.
and so it's kind of like maybe it's his consciousness sort of like going through the different options of how this birthday could go, and like how much he actually values the company of his friends versus the company of his romantic partners.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in the end, after Ladies Who Lunch going into being alive, he does have this sort of realization of this is why people seek out other people's company in marriage and in their lives. And I think he does realize that. It's my like personal headcanon that he would have gone on to meet like newer girls because he's kind of already like messed up the current relationships he's in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like he would have to start anew with someone and sort of start on the right foot to get anywhere with them.
No, I think that's fair. I think you have that big epiphany, you learn something, and then it's like, okay, let's move on. And the next person I'm with, I can actually have a functioning relationship with.
Yeah.
Well, Christine, thank you so much for joining me here today. This has been really great. We've revealed some things. We've delved into a lot of the topics that brings us up. We've learned about coercible. But if people wanted to continue hearing from you, seeing what you're up to, how can they do so?
So my personal Twitter handle is Across the Arch. And then, like I mentioned, I do have a podcast mostly about current Tony-nominated or Tony-eligible musicals called Bottomless Broadway. We'll be starting up our regular season probably in January, but you can also follow that on any of your normal podcast platforms or on Twitter and Instagram at BottomlessBway. So if you want to reach out in any of those platforms, then feel free to do so.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me again. This was a lot of fun to break down.
Thanks for listening. You can email the show at puttingittogetherpodcast@gmail.com, and you can follow Sondheim Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. Thanks to the Alberta Podcast Network, to ATB, Park Power, and to NorQuest College this week. Putting It Together is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and pretty much anywhere you can get podcasts from. Consider subscribing so you never miss an episode. And if you are an iPhone user, if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, that is one of the best things you can do so that the show reaches more people. Next week, we'll be talking about Have I Got a Girl for You, which is essentially a retort to this week's song. As always, a big thanks to the great Chris Taniguchi, who designed the podcast artwork, and to Nick Driscoll for composing our theme music. For now, we've reached the end of our episode. Yes, I know. Goodbye for now. Oh, and then I really do want to talk about if you think that the switching of Bobby into being a woman changes fundamentally how this song is looked at, type of thing. So that's the basic things I'm going to talk about. But is there anything that you want to make sure gets brought up?
A lot of those are actually the same things that I wanted to talk about. The only other thing that I really think would be interesting to talk about is the use of the term crazy.
Yeah. Okay.
And like, and just what it means in different contexts, I think. But,
let me write that down just so I don't forget to bring that up.